Hey everyone, this is a spur of the moment video. I watched Die Hard 2. Not for the first time, obviously. I've seen Die Hard 2 many times over the years. And I don't want to do a review of Die Hard 2 per se, but I did have a couple of thoughts that I thought would be worth uh, just getting off my chest and sort of thinking through. And I was thinking about why Die Hard 2 is kind of the stepchild of the original trilogy. Um, People tend to obviously love one because it's a classic and one of, if not the best action movie of all time. Die Hard with a Vengeance is loved quite a bit and tends to be most people's favorite sequel. Not everyone, but most. And then Die Hard 2 is kind of seen as the disappointing sequel that came fairly quickly after the first one. Now, I wasn't really around. I was alive in 1990, but not by much. So I wasn't exactly experiencing that. By the time I was old enough to watch Die Hard, the three movies existed, and the three movies were what I watched. I was enjoying myself. I was watching Die Hard 2, and I was having fun, and I was really enjoying it. And I've got some nostalgia, admittedly, so that does help things. But I was wondering, this is definitely the weakest of the three. I'm not trying to argue otherwise. Like Die Hard 1 is a damn masterpiece. Die Hard 3 is a really solid movie. This is definitely flawed. It definitely suffers from sequelitis. But I was thinking, why is people are maybe a little harsh on it compared to what they perhaps should be. So what? And while I agree, there's a lot of reasons why it's not as good as Die Hard. There's a lot of things that make it lesser. I think I was thinking more along the lines of why does this feel less like a Die Hard movie than with a Vengeance? What about it? Because in some ways, a lot of the complaints with Die Hard 2, like a lot of sequels, is that too much of it's the same. It's the same thing again. It's just there's even a joke about it in the film where he says, "How can the same thing happen to the same guy twice?" When my biggest complaint about Die Hard 2 is probably that it's not uh, similar enough. I feel like there's a couple of things about Die Hard 2 that feel very un-Die Hard to me. You've got the airport location, you've got John McClane doing his thing, and I think some of the things that I do like about Die Hard 2, which, regardless of the rest of the quality of 4 and 5, which is a whole conversation in and of itself, Die Hard 2 John McClane still feels like John McClane. He still looks like Bruce Willis of that era, and that's not something to do with quality or effort. That's just it was made at the time. But he feels like that John McClane. He feels just as wisecracky and disgruntled and sort of everyman esque and all those other things. Not to say that he doesn't survive some shit that no human being should survive later on in the film, because he does, but just the characterization, he feels like that John McClane, and he still does to a fair extent in the third one. Obviously, but four was so much later. Bruce Willis had changed so much, and how the character was written just felt like it had moved on. He still feels like John McClane, so that's part of why I think I still enjoy this when I watch it, and why I still enjoy his interactions with everyone, and I enjoy just the mood and the vibe of Die Hard 2. So, it's the snowy weather, they're at the airport, we have bad guys taking over things. But when I talk about not feeling diehardy enough, I think the main thing I'm talking about is actually just how much John McClane in the film constantly interacts with large groups of people. Die Hard 1, it's not just the single location, there's terrorists, and like that's the premise. And that's what people often mean when they say Die Hard on a boat, Die Hard on a plane, Die Hard on a ship, Die Hard on a train, whatever. Uh, like all those like sort of knockoff ideas, right? That's what they always say. And that is a part of it, but and technically Die Hard 2 has the location, but it's a little bit too open, and they leave to go get the villains who are over at a church at one point. It doesn't feel as constrained. But the big thing though is that John McClane constantly interacts with everyone else who's involved. He goes back to the control tower and talks to various characters. You've got the head of security at the airport, you've got the air traffic controlman, you've got all these various characters that he's constantly coming back to and interacting with again. So that feeling of like John McClane on his own, sort of having to figure things out and being so disconnected from everyone else, is kind of betrayed a little bit. And I think that's why it genuinely is. I mean, even if it nailed this, it would still probably be lesser than Die Hard 1 because it would still be the second one. It would still be a reiteration of it. But I think that's maybe the main thing that is disappointing about Die Hard 2 is the lack of that feeling. But I do think some of the set pieces are fun. Although none of them are as iconic as the first film. I think the other thing that puts it down compared to the first film, and this is not a knock on the actor, because I love Bill Sadler, William Sadler. I think he's a great character actor, but he's given this really intense, villain who is like, we start off by seeing him like do like breathing exercises, and he's butt ass naked, and he's given this really intense character. And Hans Gruber in the first film has so much. It's also much simpler. Right? I think Die Hard 1, like, you have Hans Gruber, who's given a lot of time and attention, and he has a lot of characteristics. Alan Rickman did a fantastic job with that character. And then you have the one main henchman dude with the long hair, who's kind of the sub boss, if you will. Die Hard 2, like, it's so convoluted, the villain plot. You've got Sadler with all of his men, including a Robert Patrick right before he became famous with Terminator 2. But you have him and his men. Okay, so that's effectively the Die Hard 1 setup, is that group of guys. But then we also have the evil general they want to free, who's been flown into the airport. That's why all this is happening. Okay, fair enough. But then you also have double crosses of teams of other characters who turn out to be villains. By the time we get to the end of the movie, there's like 4 proper main villains, in the sense, I mean, they're all on the same team and they're all on the same side, but in terms of like Die Hard 1, you had Hans Gruber and you had long haired guy who's kind of the one level down, and then everyone else was kind of equalish, right? But here we have Sadler, we have General Guy played by Franco Nero. It was nice to see, I didn't know who Franco Nero was when I was watching this when I was young, but I know who he is now. The leader of the ops team, who turns out to be a traitor, who are all secretly working with the bad guys. So he's kind of another sub-level style boss. So you have like 3 of them who are all kind of fighting to be the main villain. They all have... The General probably has the least, but he still has some interactions with McClane. And you have... I wasn't necessarily sure who like McClane's main rival was in this movie. When you watch Die Hard 1, he interacts with Gruber enough and has some back and forth with them. They build up a bit of a repertoire. And one of the things I love about Die Hard 1 is that Hans Gruber is a really intelligent character. Me and Matt did a review of Die Hard 1 a few years ago, and I'd seek that out, but I'll just to reiterate one of my points from that is that both McClane and Gruber are equals in that they are both intelligent and take what they're doing seriously versus everyone else. All the other law enforcement, or other than Alan, are all a bunch of idiots who all think they're hot shots. The FBI guys think they're hot shots, and they've got everything under control. But McClane takes it seriously. Gruber's a dangerous villain to McClane because he also takes everything seriously. And the reason why Gruber finally fails, the only reason why he loses at the end of the movie, is because for one moment he decides to like relish in his victory. He decides to say yippee-ki-yay, mother effer, back to McClane, and that moment is what gives McClane the chance to win. It's him finally letting the ego overtake who he is. It's when he loses himself a little bit, and that's kind of the whole thing, is McClane gets under his skin enough to make him lose his cool for a second, and that's what lets McClane win, right? And that's partly why Gruber's such a great villain, is because he's smart enough that he is going to win, and it's only until McClane gets under his skin enough that he doesn't. There's no direct correlation in this movie. Like, he kind of pisses off the military guy a little bit. He definitely pisses off, the general. He pisses off Sadler a little bit. But none of them have, like, a one-on-one, or none of them have, like, any kind of, like, what feels like real beef by the end of the movie. Sadler, he shouts out, "Is that you, McClane?" when they've got him trapped in the plane. And it just doesn't feel like they've built up any kind of rivalry in any way with McClane and any of the villains in particular. So I think it needed that central focus as well, and a villain who had a bit more character to kind of raise it above. But those are the 2 main things: the villains being a bit more convoluted and less focused in terms of a rivalry with McClane, and it feeling a bit more scattered and less confined. But more importantly, McClane feeling like he can just come back and interact with all the other characters again, and he just comes and goes, and he's never feels like he's off. He never feels like he's truly just trapped and off on his own. And I think that's maybe something. And Die Hard with a Vengeance, I think, does well. He has a partner. Obviously, he's not on his own in Die Hard with a Vengeance. He's with Samuel L. Jackson. But as a pair, they're off on their own, right? As a pair, that's kind of the spin on it almost. one, that you're in a full city rather than a more confined location. But I actually think Die Hard with a Vengeance feels more like a Die Hard movie than 2 does, because they're kind of off on their own. They're segregated from the rest of the cast. Yeah, we follow the other police officers try to find the bomb and stuff, but they're off on their own, doing stuff that ultimately might save the day. And that's the key thing that makes Die Hard feel like Die Hard to me in a lot of ways. It's this some villains show up, invade, a building, airport, city, and John McClane, possibly with a little bit of help, basically be discounted, but ultimately he's going to be the one who saves the day because he's so goddamn determined and stubborn, but also smart. Which is why I remember when the trailer or the premise for Die Hard 5, A Good Day at Die Hard. I remember when I read the premise of that before I even saw a trailer, and it said the plot of this movie is that John McClane is going to go to Russia to save his son from bad guys, and I'm like, that's not Die Hard. Die Hard is not John McClane going to where the villains are. Die Hard is the villains showing up to where McClane happens to be. That is the fundamental. And I get that if you don't want to just do another Die Hard movie that's the same, I get it. Well, just don't make one. You know, you do Die Hard, then don't make Die Hard. That movie's terrible anyway, regardless of what the premise is. But Die Hard 2, I think, gets a little bit of a bad rap because I just still think it's a fun watch. I think it's a fun watch because McClane still feels like McClane. It does have, it ends with the same song as Die Hard 1. There's definitely some things you can kind of pinpoint and say they're redoing this kind of idea from the first one. But ultimately, the things that it should be copying from Die Hard 1, it's maybe missing some of those, and then some of the things that it didn't need to bother with, it did copy. It's kind of weird in that sense. But it's still a fun watch. I think it still goes in well enough. There's a couple of good kills in it, actually. I think the kills are actually a little more brutal. There's an icicle to the face of the neck. I can't remember, but there's that, and then there's a throat slit at one point that's really nasty. There's a couple of good gory deaths in it. And the mood's good. It's got a good vibe because of the Christmassy, snow storm setting. I do wish it was more confined to the airport, but it just is what it is. And plus, you know what? I will say that it has a good yippee-ki-yay moment. As much as I don't think the action set pieces are as strong as Die Hard 1, and I think that's fair, I will say I do very much enjoy the moment they chose to have him say the catchphrase, which is when he's been thrown off the villain's plane as they try to leave at the end, but he's been able to undo the fuel cap, so the fuel's just kind of pouring out as it goes, and he just lights it on fire after he says his catchphrase, and we just see the fire follow up to the plane and blow it up. And then the fact that that's used as the runway for all the planes that have been kind of circling overhead. And that stuff's fine. I'm cool with all the planes being up overhead, Holly being on one of the planes. All that's fine. I'm cool with all that premise. I get a chuckle out of her being a dick to Peck from Ghostbusters. I can't remember what his name is in Die Hard, but the air hostesses basically offering her free champagne because they found out that she slapped him, and they are sick of dealing with his shit. That stuff's funny. I'm cool with that. Yeah, that was basically it. I had this thought. I just had these thoughts about why Die Hard is a lesser film to 1 and 3, but why it still feels like a fun time and more genuine than the 4 and 5. But I do think Die Hard 3 feels more like a Die Hard movie because McClane, being off on his own, even with a partner, right, still feels more Die Hardy. That's the spin on it, right? The spin on Die Hard with a Vengeance is that it's not just McClane, it's McClane and one other person. But if they were constantly coming back and talking to the other police officers in that movie, if they were constantly interacting with them, over the phone's fine. That happens in Die Hard 1. He's constantly on the walkie-talkie. That's fine. But it's them being off on their own that makes it kind of Die Hardy. And yeah, so just some random movie thoughts. I might do these from time to time when I rewatch something and I have a thought that I want to express. But yeah, thank you for joining me. You can, of course, go support us over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. Please do like and subscribe and ding the bell for notifications. Those are all really important things on YouTube to help support everything. So thank you very much once again, and I will see you guys next time.